Well, as many of you will remember, the videos I've done about the many mysterious and unsolved disappearances that have occurred in our national parks, most of you who know about this phenomenon to begin with were likely introduced to it from something called the Missing 411 or Missing 411. And what is the Missing 411? Well, Missing 411 is the name of a series of nonfiction books and a documentary, two new documentaries actually, by former police officer and detective David Paulides and the team at Can-Am Missing Project about people all over the world who have gone missing under strange and similar circumstances. Now, these people are commonly never found or found dead. Those that are found either don't remember what happened to them, are unwilling to talk about what happened, or report strange phenomena surrounding their disappearance. Now, what separates these traditional missing cases from some of these others, I think, is the strange circumstances that surround them and the commonalities between the cases. So suffice it to say, there is something strange happening out in the forests and the deserts and the mountains of our national parks here in North America. And this one man, David Paulides, this is the guy to talk to about it. He's the authority, in my opinion, on the subject. He's the go-to guy. He's been studying it for years. Now, about 2 years ago, we were privileged enough to have Dave come on Secure Team for an interview following the release of his first documentary film surrounding this phenomenon. That film was called The Missing 411, as you all know. And today, I'm extremely honored and excited to announce the new release of Dave's second documentary film based off of his books, as well as the fact that Dave was kind enough to take time out of his busy schedule to stop by Secure Team today for a little chat about his new film, what it means for this research going forward. And the viewers, I have to say, have been really, really excited about this. Anytime I mention the Missing 411 or speaking with Dave, they're just up in arms. So, without further ado, Mr. Paulides, I'd like to thank you for coming on to chat with me today.
Hey, Tyler, it's my pleasure to be on your show, and please don't call me Mr. Paulides. Just call me Dave.
All right. Sorry, it's just a thing I have. I can't help it. So, all right, Dave. Well, thank you for coming on. As we were talking about just a second ago, things are probably real busy with you. You have this new film coming out called The Missing 411 or Missing 411: The Hunted. The film is now available, and I think to start, just to refresh the memories of the viewers, or the thousands of new viewers that we're getting each year, or within the past 2 years since we last spoke. Could you just give us a little bit of a breakdown about, your books and films, what originally sparked your interest into this phenomenon and that caused you to think that there was definitely something much more to it? What was the exact happening that occurred that said, okay, I'm going to look further into this?
Yeah, so about 8 or 9 years ago, I was in a national park, and I was interviewing some contractors that worked in the park about some things. And I was already a published author of 2 books. I was going around the park, and I noticed 2 park rangers that were kind of following me around. I don't know what they were doing, but it was obvious they were watching. And I left the park, no big deal. And at the end of the day, one guy first came up, knocked on the door, plain clothes, said, "Hey, I'm a national park ranger. We saw you there today. We know who you are. Myself and my partner, he'll be here in a little bit, have worked at national parks in the past, and have worked missing persons cases, but they always bothered us because there was a lot of publicity and things during those first 7 to 10 days. Then after that period of time, there was nothing. There was no follow-up. We had a tough time finding information. Most of the time people weren't found, and people went missing in areas that didn't make sense to us. And they said, somebody ought to be looking into it. And we knew you had 20 years of law enforcement behind you. You had written some books, and we saw you as credible. And I said, okay. And make a long story short, his partner comes by later, says almost the exact same thing. I leave the next day, call up for some friends in law enforcement. I explained the circumstances. And I said, hey, there are a lot of people missing at these parks? Get a call back about an hour later, and they go, wow, There's something going on. That's kind of how it all got started. And originally, I didn't think or know a lot about this, but I did know that the National Park Service has a very large contingent of National Park police officers that are trained at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. They're really smart men and women, trained very, very well. And because of that, I tell audiences all the time that you could go into any small and medium-sized police department in the United States and ask their police chief for a list of missing persons in their jurisdiction. And in an hour, that police chief will have it on his or her table. So I filed a series of Freedom of Information Act requests against the National Park Service for a list of missing people. And I get a call back about 6 weeks later from an attorney from the National Park Service asking why I wanted the information, which is really odd. And according to the FOIA, they cannot ask why you want the information and use that as a determining factor if they give it to you. And I was a little unnerved by it. I just said, I'm using it for research. And the attorney for the Park Service said that, well, they don't have any lists of missing people in their parks. And that's a mere impossibility in my mind. And I said, well, maybe it's semantics. And he goes, no, we don't have any lists, blah, blah, blah. So I talked to some investigative journalist friends of mine, namely George Knapp. And he said, Dave, they're lying. They've got it. For some reason, they don't want to give it to you. And I submitted it again using different wording, thinking maybe that would trigger it. I get another call, same thing. No, we don't have your list. And I said, okay, I'm a published author. And because of that, in the Freedom of Information Act, there's a specific segment that says that they will go get a government agency will get the information for you free of charge, and you could disseminate it. So I filed under that basis, get a call back, same attorney. He says, yeah, well, we did a summation and your books aren't in enough libraries to qualify for that exemption.
Right.
And Tyler, there's no such section. That's their internal policy maybe, but I've never heard of it, and neither has anyone else.
Right.
So I said, okay, well, tell me how much you're going to charge me if I ask you to go get me that list. So about 2 weeks later, they said that list will cost you $1.4 million.
Jeez.
So they don't want you to have it.
Stonewalling you immediately.
Right. So I said, okay, let's just start on the small. Let's just say Yosemite National Park. What are you going to charge me for that? A couple of weeks later, they come back and they say $34,000. Now, that's been 8 years. About 6 months ago, Yosemite came out with a list. They're the only park that's come out with a list of missing people, and they have 50 people on their list. Now, why did they come out with that list? Because I've written about all 50 of those people in my books.
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing hidden there. But no other park has come out with a list. So I get asked all the time, well, how many people are missing in national parks? I have no idea. But I have written 8 books, all titled Missing 411,
right,
that chronicle missing people in national parks, national forests, and rural areas. And we started with national parks because that's where the National Park Service had a police force, and I thought we could get information. But it slowly branched out to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, to the Department of the Interior, to public lands, to private lands. Mm-hmm. And as long as all of the disappearances match a specific profile we developed after reading 5,000 cases, then we'll include it in the study.
Right, right. Well, I think whenever you go into an investigation and you have government agencies or other various agencies stonewalling you right out of the gate, I think that's a clear indicator that you're onto something. And, that's the way it's been with us and UFO researchers trying to figure out what's in our skies, what's out in space. I mean, it's obvious they're trying to hide something. And yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's what I was going to mention, how you were trying to obtain these lists. They were trying to get you to pay, or telling you had to pay an exorbitant amount of money, millions of dollars to get, and it's just lists of people. So why would that cost millions of dollars? So that's the first. It just doesn't make sense at all to anyone. that I've spoken to about it. So you do these 8 books, and then you finally got, I'm sure it was a major passion project of yours, your first film, Missing 411 out, which followed the cases of, what was it, 5 children? The cases that had gone missing, their families, the correlations between the two, and that was a great success. And that's when we did our first interview. Loved the film, and I always had hoped that you'd be coming out with another film, especially in this internet age where we have more people watching videos, less people reading, so it's harder to get the information out there. And I was extremely excited to find out when you were working on this new film, which again is called Missing 411: The Hunted, which is a little bit different. I mean, it all surrounds these unsolved and mysterious disappearances. But could you detail just briefly what are the primary differences between your first film and this one, and what makes this film that much more mysterious than the first one, if that's the case?
Great question. And one of the issues that we had was trying to get people to quickly and readily understand how unusual these cases were. So we sat around, we said, okay, for the first movie, this is going to be obvious, especially if you've had kids. A
Right.
2-year-old child who disappears in the wilderness, how far would that child wander? Would they go downhill? Would they go uphill? Would they cross meadows? Would they walk over mountain ranges? So the first case we chronicled was a 2-year-old boy who disappeared and was found 12 hours later over 2 mountain ranges away, 9 miles in distance, face down in the ground. Now, anyone who's had kids knows a 2-year-old isn't
Right.
going to go over 2 mountain ranges, over barbed wire fences, in that distance, in that time frame. That is not going to happen.
No.
And that happened over and through a nighttime hours. It wasn't during daytime. So Les Stroud, Survivor Man, was a friend, and he said, Dave, he goes, I read that. He goes, is it going to be included in the movie? Yeah. And he says, let me go out there and see if I can do it in that time frame and recreate what the path that child took.
That's
I
right.
said, "Sure." So we went out to Northeast Oregon, and we set Les up, had a crew with him, and about a third of the way through the night, he goes, Dave, there is no way I could do this. In the middle of the dark, I'd end up killing myself, walking off a cliff. I couldn't make the distance. There's no way anyone walks a straight line in the wilderness, number one.
Right.
So to cover 9 air miles means you're probably walking 18 miles, maybe 20. And he goes, there's no way this kid did this on his own.
Right.
So that's a survival expert explaining that a child at 2 years old couldn't do this.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't me saying this. And we were hoping that the people out there would grasp the severity of the issue when we talk about young kids and long distances. Because if I put you in the woods, Tyler, and I said, hey, I want you to just take off walking. Let's see how far you could walk in 12 miles.
Yeah.
You could probably walk a pretty long way.
Yeah.
But a small kid, no.
No.
And that was the purpose of that first film, to explain kids cannot disappear and not be found within a small radius of time. All of them are going to leave a scent on the ground. They're going to leave tracks. And one of the common profile points is there's no tracks and there's no scent for canines to follow.
Right. And I think that's a really brilliant way to start, this first film, to really kind of help explain just how serious this is and put, the skeptics to rest by going immediately to the children, because obviously adults like us, we can make our way long distances. There could be a number of different reasons or things behind how we got here or there, but you put a child in that same spot, it's just impossible for them to do that. So that's definitely brilliant the way you did that. And I think it did, it made people sit down and say, okay, that is strange and I can't account for that. So what could be causing that? But we'll get more to that here in a minute. So you do the first film, and it's a major success, and you're focusing primarily on these missing children. But then I think another great example of this phenomenon and just how real it is not only children, which are much more limited in what they can do, how far they can travel, but hunters that are experienced outdoorsmen who know these parks and these forests like the backs of their hands. And so that was the main cause behind the second film. Is that correct? To go from children to these experienced hunters.
Exactly. Another big capital point there. You have kids that travel long distances, hunters that are armed that know the area. But one thing that I should preface this on is that when search and rescue teams go into the woods and they're working a case, they start to go through a vetting process so that, let's just say, they look around and they see if there's any evidence of animal predation, meaning a mountain lion or a bear attacked the victim. There would be a big scene. People fight for their lives. There'd be torn clothing. There'd be blood. There'd be drag marks from the scene. It's pretty obvious once you see one. So if there's any evidence of animal predation, we don't work the case. If there's any evidence of voluntary disappearance, person told his family, hey, you know what? I just want to disappear. I'm not mad or anything, but don't come and follow me. We won't work that. Any evidence of mental illness, we won't work that. And it's all of these same vetting policies that search and rescue teams have it helps them decide how they're going to attack a search. So taking that into consideration, all of the easy answers in these searches are out. We're taking the top 0.5% of every search and rescue done. Most of them, they find the victim alive, they're happy, everything's good. Every once in a while, they find a victim dead, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But then there's others where search and rescue write in their reports, it's unusual, our canines couldn't find any scent of the victim. Professional trackers were brought in, they can't find any tracks. Those two primary profile points are evident in 99% of the cases we write about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that brings me, if we could just veer off course just for a quick question, because I wanted to talk to you about that, because you brought up an interesting point about how you will exclude a lot of these circumstances that are obviously natural, things like animal attacks, things that are obviously, there's nothing creepy or mysterious going on about them. And, just like I do, or anyone who's investigating an unknown phenomenon, you're going to have skeptics, you're going to have downright haters, and, there was a guy by the name of Kyle Pollack who was a data scientist and a host of something called Data Skeptic Podcast, where he had said that he had documented his analysis of your claims in an article, and he had basically said in 2017 that he had concluded that the allegedly unusual disappearances represent, quote, nothing unusual at all, and are instead best explained by non-mysterious causes such as falling or sudden health crisis leading to a lone person becoming immobilized off trail, drownings, or bear and animal attacks and things of that nature. So that's what he said about your work. Obviously, he's not a fan, but as you just said, you exclude all of that sort of natural stuff. So he really just, he basically just listed everything that you just said you exclude. You don't go near that stuff.
Absolutely correct. Now, the funny thing about what Kyle did was he obviously never read the books. Mm-hmm. And he said that he read all of the books, but in the comments on the YouTube page by people who have read my books, basically just called him out 100%. Said, no, you're guessing because, number one, Mr. Paulides never says what he thinks is happening, right, which is correct. I've never theorized. I allow the readers to come to their own conclusions. Mm-hmm. And there's tables in the books about children, and I'll start there, from, say, 2 to 10 years old and the distances they covered. Mm-hmm. And you have to be a complete moron to think that, let's just say, a 3-year-old child is found 4,000 feet up from where they were last seen and 12 miles away.
Right.
And if you think that kid's going to climb uphill the side of a mountain to get away from whatever, you're out of your mind. The child won't do it.
Right.
And he won't address that. He just completely ignores it.
Yeah.
And the pure distance that some of these 2-year-olds travel, it's outside the realm of reasonableness. But he won't address it.
Right, right. And another big thing that I would like to, maybe if I ever did speak with him, I would like to address is what his opinion would be on another very important fact that you've touched on many times, is how usually the FBI does not get involved with missing persons cases. However, you have noticed, and it seems to be growing, where the more cases you go out there investigate, you've been, and correct me if I'm wrong, you've been seeing more of a presence of the FBI showing up, involving themselves in these cases when they're not even supposed to be there. It's like out of their jurisdiction. And you've also seen things like Green Berets and things like that show up. And so, I mean, does that not show that there's definitely something more to this? I mean, are you seeing more and more FBI coming in, and what's your opinion on that? And I know you touch on that in the film.
Yes, touch on that in the film for a good reason. The FBI, in their protocol, they do not search for missing people. That's a fact. Now, they have a subsection that says very young children will assist in that search and the investigation. But for standard adults that disappear, no, they do not search for those adults. That's a local jurisdictional issue. Now, in the 1950s, when I started doing research on cases, I started to see a couple of FBI agents in the Smoky Mountains start showing up. And they would constantly always say, we're just here to monitor the case. We're not here to help, and we're not here to get involved. Well, I worked on an FBI task force for a while. I had a bunch of friends that ran local offices. The FBI, Tyler, are some of the smartest people around. They are great at documentation. I mean, really, really good. And when they say they go out and they're just monitoring, what they're doing is they're writing reports. Those reports go to the behavioral analyst unit on the East Coast. They're profilers. And they read the reports, and they're looking for similar things that are happening in other parts of the U.S. to see if they can tie them in. Say a bank robber comes in wearing a Nixon mask. And in Des Moines, Iowa, there's another case of a guy wearing a Nixon mask. And in Redding, California, there's another one. Well, they'll look at these cases, and they'll try to find linkage to put them together. Now, I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. But when these FBI agents start showing up when an 80-year-old hunter disappears in the middle of the wilderness with no evidence of a crime, they can't figure out who called the FBI. They don't even know how they were notified. And these two agents tell the press, we're just here to monitor. We're not here to do anything else. And when I interview one of the search commanders and he says he doesn't know why they were there, that's a clue that something strange is going on.
Right. Right. And I don't know if you've heard about this as well. I was reading that that drones are being outlawed in many of these parks, national forests, where you are not allowed to fly drones over them. Have you heard anything to that effect, or could you provide any, shed any light on that? Because that would definitely make me, think that they're definitely trying to hide something that's in there. They don't want cameras above these national parks. I mean, I think it's obvious they know something is going on within them, but I didn't know if you had heard about that.
Oh, yes. I mean, we film a lot in national parks in both the movies, and there's a specific section under federal law that says that you cannot fly a drone in a national park, and if you get caught, you forfeit the drone, and I think it's a $5,000 fine, too.
It definitely makes you wonder. Now, before we get to your new film, I also wanted to ask, do you know of any other organizations that are doing similar work that you are and investigating this? I think you had mentioned at one point that there were maybe 9 other countries throughout the world that were experiencing similar phenomena happening in their national parks. I mean, is this much more widespread than just the United States? And have you looked anything into what's happening overseas, or spoken with any of these other organizations just to try to, work together and compare notes? Or are you just just focusing here in North America?
So a lot of people don't know this, but I talk about it at conferences. I like to say that I'm a mile wide and an inch deep. Now, I've written a couple books about Bigfoot, and I'm also have been a MUFON investigator for 15 years. A lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
So I get stats from MUFON every month.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the top 4 countries in the world that are usually the top 4 on their list of UFO sightings is the U.S., Canada, the U.K., and Australia. They're always in the top 10, but those are usually the top 4. Now, what's unusual about that is those are the top 4 countries for missing people matching my profile. And I'm not trying to draw any linkage there. I'm just stating a fact.
Right.
And it may be because that's the best maybe internet news that comes across the wire that I can find. And say if they were having a lot of disappearances in Germany, maybe language would be a barrier to me hearing about them.
Right.
But the UK, Australia, and Canada, I hear about cases all the time coming out of those countries.
Yeah. I mean, the UFO phenomenon is definitely widespread. And yeah, from what I have found, it's those countries usually at the top, Australia, Canada, United States, Mexico, a lot of them in Brazil and South America, but they're happening everywhere. But it is strange that the UFO data would seem to correlate with a lot of where these disappearances are happening. Now, we do know from what you've told us that you've discovered clusters of people disappearing, and I didn't know if you had a certain opinion as to why these clusters were happening. And is there a specific state? You may have already mentioned this at one point, but isn't there one specific state? I'm thinking Florida, but I may be wrong, where you said that, or where the numbers were the highest for disappearances. It was just one specific state, or is there?
So I would say probably California has the most disappearances and the most clusters. Mm-hmm. Now, when we first started to do the research, I would have these piles of cases by state all over my living room, and we slowly started to work our way through them. And originally, Florida and Texas had a huge pile of cases, huge. And as we started to go through them, those cases from those states weren't matching those profiles that we had established. Mm-hmm. And we slowly vetted them out. Yeah, there's a lot of disappearances there, but they don't match what we're doing.
Right.
So I would say, as you look at the cluster map, there's 59 in the U.S. and Canada clusters. As you start up from California, it goes right up through the Sierras, the Cascades, up to Washington, around the top towards Idaho, Montana, back down through Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. And then a lot of people have written me about this, right through the center of the U.S., North Dakota, South Dakota, right through the north-south sector, right in the middle of the U.S., there's almost no cases. And then you start picking it up again on the East Coast, and the majority are right up through the Appalachian Trail all the way up to Maine, and then there's clusters all the way around the Great Lakes.
Yeah, that's strange to me, and it brings up questions as to what can be causing it. And I've asked my viewers countless times, and this phenomenon is different from almost every other sort of mysterious phenomenon, or conspiracy theory, as they like to call it these days, where you have a pretty straightforward story to tell, where UFOs, they can either be coming from space, extraterrestrial nature, or it's craft that are one of ours. But with this topic, there are so many variables, so many unknowns as to what could be causing, and many of these differences, or these disappearances, some of them, you read them and you could say, well, that could be attributable to something like Bigfoot, or some of them could be attributable to someone walking through a wormhole or a time portal. I mean, some of these disappearances are so vastly different, and there are so many, it leaves so many different options going as to what could be causing that. Now, I know you say you've never really put forth your opinion, and I don't think anyone could put a concrete theory down as to what could be causing all of them. But, it certainly, I would think that, well, let me ask you, in your opinion, do many of these cases, show hallmarks of something that, like a beast of some sort? We'll say Bigfoot. We could say Mothman. We could say Dogman. But have you, in your evidence and what you've researched, came to any conclusion regarding Bigfoot and, some sort of cryptid or creature that's not a bear, not something natural, and that is that a serious possibility to you that some of these disappearances could be caused by such creatures?
So let's take a step back for a second and talk about conspiracy theories for a minute. First of all, you will never, ever have heard me propose a theory about what's happening here.
Mm-hmm.
So for somebody to say that this is part of the conspiracy theory world, that's baloney. I've laid out in my books 8 books of facts, and I'm willing to go anybody toe-to-toe on those facts. So if those facts bother you and you wish to put me in a conspiracy theory hole, then you're going to have to dig your way out of it, because it's not. But I'll address your point on the cryptids. Again, 99% of all the cases I've written about, there's no tracks and there's no scent trail leaving the area. So how is that? Now, the other part of that is in January of this year, I was an executive producer on a History Channel 2-hour special about my work. It was called Vanished. You can watch it on Amazon. Now, in that show, we went to Wisconsin, and we met a theoretical physicist at one of the universities there, and we sat down with him, and I had a fascinating conversation with him. And his theory behind this was fascinating. And he said, Dave, there's like 5 other of the most famous theoretical physicists. We get together every month and we talk about these kind of things. And I explained to him the portal theory, to me, doesn't hold water. And he goes, well, why? And I said, well, if portals played a part in the disappearance, then you and I, Tyler, should be able to walk down a street in New York and someone will eventually see somebody disappear right in front of them because a portal took them. But nobody ever sees this. Why? And I said, so in your world, because he believes in portals, I said, in your world, it almost has to be a directed effort to take somebody. Because in the stories I write, the parents will say, my child was right next to me 1 second and gone the next second. Or the child just walked around the corner and was gone. And in my books, I call this the point of separation. There's some time where, let's say in the hunter's book, the hunters decide to separate and go hunt one area and another hunter goes to another area, and then that hunter's never seen again. So if portals were random, again, we would see it. But no, these disappearances are happening when the people are 99% alone.
Well, so what if they're not random? What if it's something specific to what's happening in these forests and, maybe there's some sort of, underground installation, some sort of government testing in these forests, and they're snatching people up or testing some sort of technology. I mean, to think of someone vanishing when they were not more than 2 feet away from their parent and then reappear miles and miles away or at elevations that are just mind-blowing. I'm having trouble, trying to think of anything but a portal or something that would cause you just to instantaneously vanish like that. I'm just not coming up with any other plausible, natural answers to that, unless they were just snatched up by a being of some sort who's really good at tiptoeing up behind these families and snatching kids and making away without leaving a single trace. It's very hard, and that makes it even more mind-boggling for me.
So let's cover one more piece of ground that I get a lot of questions about. And they say, well, these small children, they're grabbed by a large predatory bird. And I said, but there's one big issue with that. If a bird of prey came along and snatched a child, those talons would have to dig into that child.
Hmm.
And what would that child be doing?
Screaming.
Exactly. And everybody around there would know that child was taken. But the issue is nobody ever hears anything. Second issue is when the child's eventually found, there's no marks on them. So that's impossible. Now, let's talk about a third wrench here. And that is that many of the cases that I write about, when the coroners do their autopsy, this is the strange part, they can't determine a cause of death. Now, I would say 4 years ago, I was probably 4 books into it by then, a coroner gets a hold of me, and I met them at a location and when my son was playing hockey. And we sat and we had this, I probably went on for 3 hours. And this coroner stated, Dave, you're writing about something that has bothered us for years. And we all know that it's happening. We can't understand why we can't determine the cause of death, but there's something really, really strange happening. And shortly after that, I got contacted by another coroner along those same lines. No one wants to write about it, but people know it's happening. And when there are people of science and science can't tell you why that person died, it really bothers them.
Right, right.
Now, not too long after that, I'm at a conference and this priest comes to the conference. I couldn't believe it. And, wearing his robe and priestly look, and he had read my books. And we were talking off to the side, just him and I, and he goes, Dave, he said, in the Bible, it talks about that if something takes your soul, you're no longer living. And I've always thought about that. And I've had some people write to me and say, yeah, something took their soul. That's why they died. And that's why there's no cause of death.
Wow. That is interesting. That is. I mean, I'm not a very religious person. I try to base what I do on science and facts, but then you have to realize that science gets things wrong all the time. Every 10 years, they have to rewrite their paper and change their findings. So, science is not as concrete and solid as you would think it is. And yeah, that's just a very interesting theory right there. It definitely is. And I'm just surprised that a priest came to talk to you. I'm just trying to picture it here in my head. I mean, that's crazy stuff. You're reaching people when you've got priests coming to see you. So congrats on that. So, if it's not a portal, and we'll break down some of these. If it's not a portal, let's say it could be Bigfoot. Now, obviously, a lot of people, there's a stigma around Bigfoot, and I, going against my best efforts and my own stigma around it, never really posted a lot of videos out of the thousands I've done around Bigfoot, mainly out of the fear of talking about it and being called a kook. Although, that's pretty funny because with some of the stuff I do talk about, Bigfoot it seems to be more of the toned down version. I'm talking about aliens, UFOs, wormholes, some really crazy shit, And so recently when I first declared on the channel that we were going to be doing an interview, and I shared some clips from your new film. I spoke a lot about Bigfoot in that video, and started doing research, and it amazed me that just how many sightings of Bigfoot's just a name I'm calling it. It could be some other cryptid or strange creature. We don't know what it is. I'm just, for the sake of simplicity, I'm calling it Bigfoot. But there are so many cases of not only sightings of things that look like Bigfoot, but tracks, and we're talking legit tracks, not the few main hoaxes that everyone knows about, but tracks that have been found throughout the decades that were never explained, with disappearances surrounding those, strange noises, strange smells, and I after I made that video, I definitely started to consider seriously that this Bigfoot, again, or whatever you want to call it, could very well be a legit cause for some of these disappearances, and again, whether we're talking about Mothman or Dogman or whatever, I think that some of these cases and the evidence behind them suggests that they didn't walk into a wormhole, but it looks as if something larger than a bear or your typical, woodland creature could be causing this. Now, we also have another angle, which is the UFO angle, which I don't think I really got to talk to you much on before. And the UFO, and I don't want to give too much away, but this new film, I loved it because it touches more on the UFO angle. Because, correct me if I'm wrong here, in some of these cases, these people have witnessed strange lights, strange things in the air. And, well, what more can you tell me without giving out too much for the film, about the UFO phenomenon as it relates to your research? Have you come to any new conclusions? Are you leaning more towards there could be a UFO aspect to this?
Okay, now you got to give me a fair shake here, Tyler. You were talking about Bigfoot and you just breezed through it and you didn't let me respond. I got it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
So, for the biggest skeptic that you have out there listening about Bigfoot, I want you to pay attention. About 4 months ago, I released a book called Bigfoot, Wild Men, and Giants. And all it is 450 pages of nothing but news articles straight from newspapers from 1680 until 1923. So if you don't think that the phenomena is real, then our press has been lying about it for hundreds of years. Mm-hmm. Because all of the articles I present, and they're just news articles, it's just pages of articles, right, talk about a hairy biped with hair all over the body that they called a wild man. And the reason I got to that was, and by the way, that's the biggest selling book I think I've ever written. Mm-hmm. The reason I got to that was I was going through archives looking for stories about old missing people cases. And I kept coming across these wild man stories, and I started to pay attention to them and started to cut them out. And then in conjunction with that, you were talking about science and science being wrong. There's articles in there about in North America going back to the 1800s that farmers and ranchers were finding bones of giants 7 to 10 feet tall buried on their property. These are big news articles by some of the biggest newspapers in the U.S. Mm-hmm. And in those articles, it states that they called an academic institution. In many of the cases, they called the Smithsonian, and in the article, it says that the Smithsonian comes and takes the bones, even though the Smithsonian says now that they have no bones of any giants. So it fascinated me, and so I put that book together. It's a tabletop-sized book where people can go and just read at their leisure without any opinion. Just be your own judge. If this has been happening, it's been going on for 300 years in the press.
Right. And I think, that the mainstream media has always suppressed things and tried to make a mockery of them. And when I was talking about conspiracy theories, I was referencing the mainstream media, and that's what they call us if we try to look into certain things like this. And yeah, in my research, Bigfoot is still one of the biggest topics out there. When I posted the video about your film and I mentioned briefly in it Bigfoot, I couldn't tell you how many thousands of comments I got from viewers begging me to do more videos on Bigfoot, that they would like to hear more about it, and or explaining their own strange happenings with things, people living in the woods, things they've heard, things they've seen. And so I think this is definitely not just some tired old conspiracy theory that no one talks about anymore. I think from what I've seen, it's still a very real phenomenon. It's still happening. People are still seeing these things. And I think the mainstream media, they do what they do. They play a huge part in suppressing it. They've done it with UFOs and aliens for years now. They've done it with Bigfoot. And so any of you guys out there who haven't read his book, Dave's book he was just speaking of. We'll put a link to it as well down below because that seems extremely fascinating. And, as it pertains to Bigfoot, Dave, did you kind of feel that same apprehension in the beginning of bringing him up for the fear of losing credibility?
Tyler, I'm kind of like with you. The haters are going to hate,
Right.
and you got to live by your own honor and integrity. I talk about facts, and I'm putting nothing but facts in front of the public, and let them be the judge if it's true or not.
Right.
But again, from some of the biggest newspapers in the world, they're going back hundreds of years talking about an issue that's still in the press today.
Right. Well, I mean,
now, go ahead.
If you, let's just say hypothetically, if you were, let's say, to solve the mystery somehow and absolutely knew the truth behind all of these cases, would you share it? No matter what it was, even if it was something unspeakably horrible or something paranormal that sounded totally crazy, if you were sitting on information about this, that you knew this is what was causing this, would you leak it to the public? Would you come out and let us know?
I wouldn't leak it. I'd write a book and absolutely. I mean, that's all what this is all about.
Yeah.
But if there's some big secret and somebody knows, and come forward, come on your show, come on any of the shows I'm on and tell the world what it is.
Yeah.
But Tyler, I've sold thousands of books, thousands.
Yeah.
And I've had thousands of emails over the years. I swear to you, I have never, ever had anybody read my 8 books and come to me and say, I know what's happening here.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just doesn't happen. The most common response I get are people who have watched a few online pirated videos that are completely fraud and half aren't even me. And they come out and they say, oh, we know what's going on.
Right. And they don't.
Getting to your UFO question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's hit it.
So, yeah, in this movie, we highlight a series of hunters that have disappeared. Now, in amongst all of this, I came out with the Hunter's book about 2 years ago, and the movie's based off that book. Well, since I wrote the book, I've had hundreds of stories from hunters about what they've encountered in the woods. Now, why are hunters an unusual group to write about? First of all, most of the time, the hunters are a group of people who have hunted the same area, sometimes for 40 years.
Right.
They know that hunting ground like you know your backyard. The idea that those people are going to get lost isn't reality. They also have the biggest loudspeaker in the world over their shoulder, and that's their rifle. If they get lost, hunters know to shoot off 3 rounds, and that's a uniform notification that they need help. If you shoot off 3 rounds once an hour, eventually people are going to find you. So that's one huge thing.
Right.
Now, amongst all of the stories that we've heard about hunters, a couple resonated really deep. And why? Because we picked 2 stories for this movie that had scientific evidence that they are fact.
Mm-hmm.
One was a story of a group of hunters that went to the same area for 50 years. And the same group, 7 to 8 guys, all had the same sort of encounters. Screams and yells and UFOs and all kinds of things. And one of the guys did something really smart. Way before there was anything digital, he brought a real old-fashioned tape recorder in the 60s and 70s and recorded what was heard. And then he took that recording to a university and had a professor of audiology write a report about it and said, number 1, it wasn't re-recorded. Number 2, this isn't human. This is outside the range, high and low of a human. And he went right down the line and validated that this was taken in the field. They don't know what it is, but it's something really eerie. And the person who recorded it was in our movie. We went to the site where this happened, and he gave us the recordings to play because it's time, he said, that they came out and be in a film.
Yeah.
That's number 1. And then we did a great graphics recreation of what was seen in the campground flying through it.
Mm-hmm.
And What do you think of
Gave
that?
me goosebumps. It definitely
Yeah.
did. It did. And, that's why I'm so excited for the viewers to see this because, I mean, it covers so many different aspects, including, the UFO angle. Because in my opinion, I certainly think that there's a UFO angle to this. And, it's perfect for the channel and the people I talk to. They want to know more about it, and that's another reason I was so excited. But the entire film, whether it's UFOs or cryptids or what have you, I mean, it's all very well made. I mean, it deconstructs, this handful of hand-chosen missing persons cases from New York to Ohio to New Mexico to California. And it covers it all. It does it wonderfully, and I couldn't have been happier with the film. Like I said, my wife and I both had goosebumps after watching it, and we were still no further to the truth. We kind of looked at each other and said, well, I mean, there's no way to unpack this except to see what Dave comes out with next, and maybe he'll be able to connect more dots. And so after this film, are you planning to create any further documentaries based on some of your other books?
Well, when you do a documentary like this, you've got to have a crew around you that are super professional.
Mm-hmm.
I'm overly lucky to have a guy named Mike DeGrazier be our director and chief videographer. The guy is one of the smartest guys I've ever met, and he has insight into film that you can see when you watch this, that somebody really special had their hand on the pulse of this. And yeah, I'm the guy you see on screen a lot in this movie, which is a lot different than the first one where I wasn't in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in this one a lot, but really the magic is done behind the scenes with the editing and the directing, and Mike did a fantastic job.
Right.
But on top of all of that, I don't want to exclude anything or think I'm running from the truth. But again, in all of the cases I've researched, nobody's ever coming out and saying, yeah, I was picked up and carried from the scene, or I was zoomed up through the sky up to a craft. You never hear those kind of things.
Yeah.
So this movie, what we tried to do was take the most credible things that happened to hunters that was highly unusual and put those in the movie and say, this is what's happening, sometimes in really close proximity to other disappearances. And I'm not saying that there's a cause and effect, but I'm just saying it's pretty weird that this is happening here and those people disappeared over here.
Right. Right. And the families are right there with you. And I think that was great that the families in there are putting forth their own opinions, and they agree that something strange has happened here. And, it brings me to a question I wanted to ask you, which is that of some of these victims that have actually been found, they didn't die, they didn't just vanish forever, but the ones that came back over the years, have you ever had any of these formerly vanished victims come or try to speak with you or contact you and say, hey, this is what happened, this is what didn't happen, anything like that over the years?
Tyler, in a very high percentage of the cases, the victims don't remember anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is another unusual event. Now, a lot of times you can talk to a psychologist and they'll say, well, in a very big event in your life that scares the heck out of you, your mind tends to protect that memory, and they don't want to remember, or they can't remember.
Right.
Maybe there's something else at play we don't understand. But in a large percentage of those, they just don't know why they disappeared, where they went, or how they were found.
Yeah, I mean, you've done, and I'm sure you hear this all the time, and I know you've been doing a bunch of interviews lately, and you're probably burnt out, but I want to thank you for coming on. That you are a legend, at least to my millions of viewers. The fans love you. They love every time you put out a new book. It's just so fascinating. And so, I want all of them, if you can, to go and check out this new film. Like I said, I watched it. I wouldn't vouch for it if I didn't think it was good. I'm much more careful and selective in the films that I like to do interviews for these days, and I thought it was phenomenal. So, could you maybe tell viewers here where they can find the film, or they can find your books, and just whatever links that are important to getting the word out?
So if you go to our website, the Can-Am Missing Project, there is a link there under The Hunted. And if you click on that link, then you will see all of the various sites online, etc. We even sell the DVD to it and the book. Now, one thing I'd like to tell your viewers, Tyler, that is very frustrating to me is that I've never had a podcast, and I only have one YouTube channel that's called the Can-Am Missing Project.
Mm-hmm.
See a YouTube channel out there that says David Paulides, Missing 411, David Paulides Podcast, etc. Those are all frauds. And if you listen to something there, half the time, it's not even me. And I think that they're using my name to get you to click through,
Mm-hmm.
but don't believe what you're listening to. Please don't go there and get hooked in.
Okay. Well, you heard it here, guys. Now, likewise, I'm going to put links down below so you guys can go and show Dave some love. He put a lot of time and work into this, and, this isn't just some documentary selling snake oil to make a few bucks. I mean, you can tell that Dave cares about this. I mean, it's obvious. He's been doing it for years, and so I would advise all of you to go and check out the film. Pick a night, sit with your family, give it a watch. Tell us what you think. Check out Dave's books. He's the master of it. And Dave, I just want to thank you again for coming on. I don't want to give up too much more information because I don't want to give out any spoilers for the film. I want the fans to go and check it out if they can. But, I do want to thank you for all of your hard work and your dedication over the years. You're doing something, you're doing much more than a guy like me sitting on a computer posting YouTube videos could ever imagine doing. I wish I could get out there on the ground and really have a body of work like yours. So thank you again, sir, for coming on. And hopefully, we'll have another film out soon or another book, and I'd be happy and honored to have you back on the channel.
Tyler, like you said, I've done tons of interviews about this, but what your viewers don't know, and I've been pretty lucky, is that we were talking and that, Tyler, you're a really nice guy and easy to talk with. And on the other side of the mic, as someone who has been interviewed by a lot of people, the viewers appreciate the way you come at something and the way you interview someone. So from my end, I appreciate it, and I say thank you.
Well, thanks, Dave. That means a lot. It really does. I do my best. I'm still a work in progress, but I'm working on it. So thank you again, and we'll stay tuned, and we'll get people out watching that film. So thanks again.
Thank you.
All right.